Well, hi everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Feeling Smarter. As always, I'm joined by Tim Miller. G'day, Tim. How are you?
Yeah, going pretty well, Aaron. How are you doing?
Not too bad, thank you. Well, you're off this week to the SMSF Association Technical Summit. You've
Yep.
got the joys of talking about contributions with your workshop.
Yes,
And why I said that, I got no idea because that's not what we're even going to talk about today.
absolutely.
But what we are going to talk about is the finalisation recently of the tax ruling 2013/5. So about when a pension commences and ceases. And I kind of call it the Bible, tax Bible of pensions, because it gives us so much insight into the Commissioner's views from an income tax purpose. And whilst not a lot of things changed in terms of the particulars of when a pension commences and ceases. A
Yep.
lot of that change naturally was to reflect the introduction of the 1 July 2017 measures. What we did see, quite interestingly, was the Commissioner's views become much clearer around circumstances where a pension fails the pension standards. And I use the word fails the pension standards because, yes, it might mean a failure of the minimum in certain circumstances, but we can also fail the pension standards, for example, if we have a transition to retirement income stream that goes more than the 10% maximum. So, Tim, I might just get you to just give a quick summary of what the Commissioner has said in respect to this measure around the failure of the pension standards.
Yeah, look, and look, I know why you mentioned contributions, Aaron. It's because we're still waiting for the contribution ruling, which is our other Bible
Yes,
of
it
tax
is.
office rulings, and so these two documents really go hand to hand from an administration point of view for understanding contributions and pensions. But it's an interesting ruling, this one, and again, we both go all the way back to when the draft ruling was released, sort of pre 2013. And in that time, a lot of issues such as TRIS, as you've just mentioned, were far more prevalent in regards to the whole ability to make elections to take a lump sum instead of pension payments. And a lot of those issues were covered off in these rulings and subsidiary rulings that were provided at the time around TRIS. And so we've seen a lot of tidying up, as you say, of the language used in these rulings, but also some of the vagaries around how some of the areas work, and the significant one that you're talking to there really is this failure of the pension standards, where whilst we've got commissioners' discretion and issues around sort of small shortfalls, one of the big issues that we've always been dealing with or tried to deal with is if somebody fails to meet those pension standards by not paying the minimum, for example, what does it mean? What are the consequences with regards to the pension actually ceasing? And it's been ultimately been made quite clear in this final ruling that, in the commissioner's point of view, is even if you continue to receive payments, those payments will ultimately be lump sum payments, and the pension must be, if you wish to ever be entitled to the exempt current pension income deduction again for an account-based pension, you must commute the pension and start a new one.
Yeah, so
So yeah,
yeah, I was just going to say there. So the interesting thing that we now have is a clear difference in the way the Commissioner looks at the income tax rules, which is what we've always said, but there was a bit of a grey cloud sitting over the construct. I
yes.
mean, we reference superannuation law, so the CIS
Yep.
versus tax, but it's really what did the contract between the member and the trustee say? So by virtue of the deed,
Yep.
and the contracts are the pension documents themselves, because in a lot of instances, what we had was a contract, and it wasn't just because there was a breach of the contract, it didn't mean that the contract ceased.
No.
And therefore, the view was that in the subsequent year, you might have lost your tax exemption in that year, but the contract continued, which therefore allowed you to continue to make payments in the subsequent year. And the acknowledgement was, well, I just get the tax exemption to roll in again in the following year. And
Yep.
that's really not what the Commissioner's saying here. He's saying you must have a proper cessation, and that is that full commutation of the income stream at that point in time.
Yeah, yeah, and so, whilst in a practical sense, we've always had that appreciation, well, since 2017, have had that appreciation that you have to ultimately go back and well, effectively, they say the pension used to cease at the 1st of July, all right, for the year, but then from a transfer balance cap point of view, it would cease at the end of the year. So, it's going to be interesting just to see whether there's going to be any changes at all, and there's nothing to suggest that there will be, to some of those transfer balance cap documents that have highlighted these issues as well, just to align all of the various ATO material that covers off on this the subject matter as such.
Yeah, and to me, I can see potentially some of these issues sort of festering for some period of time, because again, it's making sure you understand what the impact of that change means, because you rightly said there the fact that the pension ceases for income tax purposes at the start of the year, but you don't and ordinarily we assume that commutation, or the transfer balance cap commutation, so the debit, would occur at the 30th of June. But if you actually don't commute the pension at that time, then the commutation will be happening at some point further. There may be an expectation that in the subsequent year that there is an entitlement to ECPI, but ultimately, unless the auditor actually sees those actual commutation documents and the fact that within the accounts of the fund it rolled back to accumulation, and then you have a brand new pension that started, then only in that instance will the fund be entitled to its ECPI, and then you will have potential issues both in the context of Part A from a financial perspective, but then also Part B from a compliance perspective.
Yeah, yeah. Look, for me, it's also one of these things too that, and I know hindsight's a wonderful thing, but the reality is, you take someone that is paying quarterly pension payments, right, and versus someone that's on a monthly payment. Now that person on a monthly payment might have 11 months, and they might fail to meet the minimum by not making that last payment. And so we've got this commissioner's the ruling, or the referencing from the commissioner, where you can apply discretion if you do that once, and make sure the payment is made as soon as practicable in the new year, and still retain the ECPI. If you've got a member that's paying quarterly, right, for example, and they've made their first 3 quarterly payments, and then for some reason there might be a fees come out or something like that, the final quarter's debit of the pension payment doesn't come out of the bank account, but you've sold an asset in that first 3 quarters where everything had been met and everything was done appropriately, but due to one event, there's been this failure, and there's effectively no remedy for that, and you lose that ECPI of that whole transaction, that you've done the right thing or thought you'd done the right thing. And so, whilst we kind of knew that that's where the commission was heading, it's now definitive in that place. And so, we've really got to make sure that as SMSF trustees, we're monitoring the bank account of the fund all the time. If we've got upcoming periodical payments that they're being made, and again, just that concept that you and I do regularly is whenever we're doing any talking to anybody in June, is make sure you review your minimum pension obligations to ensure that you've met them, to make sure you don't run into these problems. Now, the flip side, of course, is TRIS and people taking more than their minimum, which is more, I guess, the last piece to the pension puzzle, which we won't talk about in any great length today, and that's the documentation that's currently on hold in the ATO, and that is the early release of super benefits, and excess TRIS payments fall into that, where you've accessed preserved monies, and how you can remedy those issues. Now, the ATO have ultimately, at this point, pulled back on their draft documentation around that subject matter, but hopefully maybe the finalisation of this ruling will lead to that one being reinitiated, so we can actually just finalise all rules around pensions.
Yeah, and I did recall we saw in July, early July, when the ATO made this update, that some of the language on their site, so in particular TRIS's, did reflect the fact that when you fail that pension standard, and again using the term pension standard because it could be minimum and maximum, that you then do come into that early release stuff, and this is where it becomes hugely problematic. And again, that practical guidance that we were getting from the ATO was to try and understand some of the nuances. So when could we apply relief, and when can't we apply relief, and that sort of thing. So you're right, hopefully we do get some of that guidance. And I guess it's one of the main reasons we've gone through in the past couple of weeks since the finalisation of this ruling to make specific updates, both in the context of the deed and then also within the pension documents. And in our pension rollback suite, we now have the ability to prepare documents around the fact that the pension standards have been failed, whether it is an account-based pension, whether it's a TRIS in the retirement phase, which effectively one and the same thing, and then obviously a TRIS as well, and taking into consideration exactly what the Commissioner has spoken about within this ruling. So we are forcing that commutation to occur, and then effectively it would require the trustees in conjunction with the member to start a brand new income stream as part of that process.
Correct.
So I guess, Tim, the final thing just to note here is that this is just going to be one of a number of topics that we're going to be covering in our upcoming SMSF Pensions Masterclass. So we have that scheduled for the 27th of August off the top of my head. So yeah, I guess what else can people contemplate when it comes to our upcoming Pensions Masterclass?
Yeah, well, that and another matter that was I guess finalised, but it was probably finalised before this draft, was the status of reversionary versus non-reversionary pensions inside this. When does a pension cease? And the language in the very early draftings of this original ruling talked about the use of binding death benefit nominations and other things. Well, the wording is certainly far clearer, I think, in this final document, where it talks about the pension terms in accordance with the governing rules. Or any other pension rules. And so, binding death benefit nominations sort of sit outside that. So, what your pension terms in the deed are and how they're written, and any pension contract. So that's going to be certainly something that we discuss at length, because we like a good fight about reversionary versus non-reversionary pensions.
Yeah, and I think we may even have one of those fights coming up as part of our weekly series as well in the lead up to our upcoming Pensions Masterclass.
Can't wait.
Well, thank you once again for joining us for this week's edition of Feeling Smart. If you want to find out more about our upcoming Pensions Masterclass, you can visit our website, smartersmsf.com/events. And we look forward to you joining us for that masterclass. Hugely popular are our masterclass events. So take a look, even consider membership, which is part of our CBD regular or CBD business packages. To you, Tim, thanks once again.
Always a pleasure, Aaron.
See you next week, and bye for now.
Bye-bye.